Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to a brief and chaotic overview of the new Nirvana modification, which fundamentally changes everything and in some aspects, in my personal opinion, even outshines the Broken Arrow. This will be very funny. It might be very speculative, but you'll see for yourself after the review of the changes, and of course, we'll watch the replay. A Canadian named Lateralis is creating the mod, an experienced model maker from Wargamer Dragon, and indeed one single person who simply sits and waits for 2 months. If he understands what to press and how to change the value, the game becomes exceptional. We will analyze key changes in the 27th Division. Fashion changes are so numerous that listing them all would take about 3 hours. It will take me 3 hours to list the changes. Changes start with damage and end with tweaks like those for players who didn't like the auto cover of tanks when they would drive sideways into a neighboring area, causing them to die. Even this is being fixed in the game. Rockets work differently. For example, the AMRAAMs now have greater guidance speed and other factors, such as those modified by the Soviet Union. I won't finish my thought. Here's a visual description instead. Tank damage has increased, and notably, the aiming time has been significantly reduced. Tanks and machine guns reload faster and inflict more damage than before. Soviet tanks, in principle, have become better in terms of performance. What you can also notice is that the supply tab has been moved here for all the commanders who can capture zones. In Varna, tournaments and regular games often faced issues with cheap commanders decapping zones by moving around the map's edges, leading to chaos. To address this, commanders have now been designated as important units that can capture zones, altering their role and significance in gameplay. Tank commanders are costly but typically armored and equipped with demoy grenades. There are 2 infantry commanders. The infantry commanders themselves are protected. They defend themselves quite well. The key focus is the diverse transport options for delivering the commander, with fast choices like armored personnel carriers and BRDMs. The mod features 2 small warehouses of 75 points each, utilizing half of the large 6,500 supply. That's quite a lot, in my opinion. It means that in this mod, you always have supply drops available, which slightly changes the game regarding helicopters, because helicopters will now almost always have the opportunity to recharge and continue fighting. This gives you an incentive to save and play longer, but the only thing that some might not like is that supplies cannot be sold in this mod. From the beginning, you are informed that transporting supplies to and from the FOB is essential, establishing a real supply line that requires protection. The number of infantry units has significantly increased, and they now vary greatly in terms of their classes. All infantry and armored personnel carriers are now more affordable. For instance, line infantry costs 30 points and an APC costs 25 points, serving as standard infantry that precedes heavier, variably priced vehicles. The BMP-2 is typically more affordable as an average BMP with glass armor, but its autocannon, PKT and EGS perform notably better in combat. The improved DPS from the autocannons is mainly due to enhanced accuracy and a more realistic performance. Unlike Varna, where you have a queue of 3 to 4 tracers and then a long reload, here it will be quick. Aim, shoot, shoot, aim, shoot, very fast. You'll definitely see this in the replay. Some vehicles, such as the BMP-3, have been upgraded, notably the Bastion with a 2800 power and 19 penetration. Autocannons have also seen significant enhancements. It makes them even more powerful than in vanilla. Don't assume that just because the mod is for Canadians, the Soviet Union is in a bad state of balance. During the tests, we found that the Soviet Union is almost on equal footing in its fight against America, and it's quite evident. What's important to add? A new trade system accounts for the weight of weapons used by fighters, such as light equipment machine gunners, allowing them to carry more RPG-22 rounds. The developer generously offers increased armor penetration for Soviet RPGs. I believe this is fair. The 27th Division, equipped with advanced infantry weapons, includes the RPG-26, which has a penetration of 18 and comes with 7 RPG rounds. Yes, tanks can no longer just drive straight into the forest, but now they reign in the fields, and that's important. Most stormtroopers are wearing free insignias. They also modified the trade stormtrooper. In short, less reduction and just a 15% bonus to physical. Damagu. And another interesting trait that we see in the game, which I hope will be evident in the replay, is that when an opponent is within a radius of 800 meters, the stormtroopers start moving 33% faster, and while they are moving, they take 50% less damage. The ability lasts for 10 seconds, enabling assault troops to safely cross a street with minimal damage, providing them a distinct advantage over linear infantry. This feature enhances the strategic role of assault troops, especially in scenarios like Soviet sapper units facing French infantry, where they would otherwise struggle without such benefits. Stormtroopers are stronger than line infantry across all divisions and decks, which I believe is appropriate. The competition requirements for UAVs have been updated to 2450 range and 60% accuracy. This trade impacts the unit's speed. Contest M moves at 20 km/h, while linear infantry moves at 26 km/h. RPG-27 has 4 charges and offers 22 penetration, unlike RPG-26. Artillery is actually that thing, let's say, that hasn't really been touched upon in the rework yet. It will be addressed in the future. Let's evaluate the fashion's popularity. Please promote this widely and share it with your friends. Basically, this mod is so good that if we can get a lot of people into it, we might even be able to influence the developers somehow. Or at least you'll witness the beginning of a really decent career for this particular mod creator, because what he has accomplished in 2 months is truly heroic, and I think you'll see that for yourself. Terrier is cheaper on average, but your supply costs are lower. Remember, you're missing 2 fobs. You can obtain 1 fob and use it with 2 barriers. The game now has a standard setup, but artillery damage remains unchanged. The plan is to boost splash damage. Conditionally, if the hail strikes, it's not so much the damage it causes that's important, but rather the concussion and suppression of enemy forces. Soviet tanks are now significantly cheaper, but income has changed. It no longer accrues per minute, and instead accumulates every 4 seconds. Overall, points accumulate slightly more than in WARNO, though the increased lethality makes this less noticeable. It might be challenging at first, but mastering it will make the game more dynamic and engaging. You don't need to spend 2 minutes to get a top tank. You only wait as long as it takes to summon a specific unit, which feels more fitting. Soviet tanks are generally more cost-effective than American ones, with impressive stats. Notably, the Cobra now has 22 penetration at a 2600 range, though it lacks a stabilizer. Reminder: processing times for all these matters are considerably longer than they were in original Varna. Some unit leaders now cost roughly the same as regular tanks, but instead of capturing zones, they provide a badge that grants additional experience with discom to nearby units. This is an important distinction to note. But in my opinion, this is exactly what we were missing, because in the original war, tankers always want to keep the commander close to the tanks, but at some point, commanders became very expensive. You wouldn't use a tank for 30-35 command points alongside regular tanks, as it could endanger the commander. This mod has been beautifully fixed, I believe. You simply have veteran officer tanks that award special badges to the nearby tanks within their vicinity. It's clear that the tank's insignia is very important, because it directly affects stress damage. Stress damage can render him effectively incapacitated. The badge bonuses have been improved, providing slightly higher rewards on average. For detailed information, refer to the mod's description. The most significant change in reconnaissance is that there are now more than 20 reconnaissance squads, almost in every division, with a total of 8 platoons. The solution may not fully resolve the problem, but it nearly tackles WARNO's intelligence issue. So far, we haven't really discussed this. Well, we as developers need to talk because I am putting in a lot of effort to promote this mod. Nothing has changed, and it works well. Intelligence is crucial, but it was easily acquired. It ultimately depends on the frequency and positioning of your calls. There are now 8 Bardaks, though I forget the original count. In the 4K world, you can confidently divide since there are 3 divisions on the map. In my humble opinion, considering that helicopters are currently operating very infrequently in WARNO, here is my perspective on the matter. The gun has been nerfed in this version, making it powerful against units but limited by its ammo supply. My favorite reconnaissance BMP-2 is now reasonably priced, as the original WARNO had skyrocketed to over 100 points due to complaints. The BMP-2's functional autocannon makes it a convenient choice, and it includes a capable reconnaissance squad with 6 RPG-22 rounds. In this mod, the SVD and all sniper rifles have been enhanced, making it crucial that special reconnaissance positions cannot simply be stormed or taken over without strategy. In WARNO, 2 machine gunners triumph over opponents like them. Running in would be challenging if special forces with SVDs are present. Air defense. Overall, software costs have decreased, and specific divisions offer unique features. In the 27th Division, you can obtain a second Level 3 badge for each software, which I find fair. You hold a double badge with 3 arrows achieving 65% accuracy across 10 themes, Tunguska at 65% and the Tor at 75%. The mod developer demonstrates greater insight than the original WARNO team by introducing a trade that reveals the hidden air detection feature. You can literally see the distance at which this machine will detect enemy aircraft. SUS Rail features 10 themes, including gut air detection, while Tunguska offers effective gut air detection at 9 km with identical equipment. Helicopter numbers have risen, and Yakubea's popularity has grown. The increase happened just because it could. We have 2 unused helicopters from the conditional 27th Division in WARNO, while the Soviet Army effectively uses attack helicopters. Please retain the helicopters. We were concerned about helicopters, but the strong air defense from the 27th Division makes their operation difficult. I'll show you that Americans have fewer helicopters on average. Helicopters function like glass cannons, flying in to deliver payloads before returning. The module has undergone various changes, enabling effective selection of different aircraft badges. You can now advance to the elite rank, but note that plane bonuses differ from those of other units. While veteran elite units get double bonuses, trains offer no bonuses at all. The basic version is akin to a stock airplane, whereas you've enhanced it by adding an exceptional pilot to that plane. The increase may be small, but it can significantly impact your fight against an opponent. Plus, all planes in general have become cheaper, meaning they have returned to their original routes when planes didn't cost so much. Their prices were constantly being adjusted downwards, essentially nerfed in the original game, because they didn't want to buff the air defense. We slightly improved air defense and adjusted the planes accordingly. You can now collect more planes in certain areas, ensuring they maintain their value, especially considering the 195-point system. She can score 195 points against you, but if you corner her, we might hit her with 1 rocket instead of 2. Let's show America what else is interesting, specifically using America as an example. Now, the armored division justifies its significance. Here is your armored division, and here is the word armored, not tank. Your tank is now initially going, you see, the second stripe. Here are your top tanks. The Guard in America, they can be pushed into the elite. Elite tanks have a 12 rate of fire. You can configure them with an 11 rate of fire for a one-on-one leadership M1, and we also offer a more affordable officer-level M1 Aichi option. If the ICHE has 350 points, the difference isn't significant, and it may be beneficial to negotiate for a lower T80 BVK price. The mod is still in development, and the M1 command tank starts at 320 points. This means all command tanks that capture zones will also start at 320 points to encourage players to choose them, as the M1 is the only one on the map. Lissison's Nonsense and the Dragoons have both been redone. Dragons now possess 19 penetration and a range of 1200, making them shorter versions of Soviet hybrids. Let's just open it like this. It will be more correct overall. Here we have conditionally Soviet arrows with a mixed breed. They have an 18 penetration, but a range of 1500. This is related to the fact that in reality, these mixed breeds actually shoot further than dragons, and the developers simply made them identical, which can be considered, let's say, a shortcut. Corrected poor quality work. The American Airborne is evident for you to see, and I'm not sure what more to say. An eagle can also fall into a trap. Currently, NATO has 2 divisions comprising American tanks and airborne troops. In contrast, the Soviet Union has the 27th Motor Rifle Division, the 76th Airborne Division, and the 7th Panzer from East Germany. The 76th is present, and the paratroopers here have no phobias. Forward deployment has been restricted, limiting the range and placement distance of units, preventing them from spawning on the opposing side of the map. This change necessitates more strategic positioning. Conversely, all infantry units, particularly paratroopers, have become notably stronger due to an increase in their reference bonuses, making them more formidable than the linear infantry of armored divisions, among others. The forward cloak was removed because arriving by helicopter is now the more sensible option. In 76, we lack helicopters, while Americans utilize Black Hawks and Chinooks with paratroopers, enabling faster deployment. Now, some kind of truck, I don't know, a forward deploying one, won't take you out so quickly because it travels longer and farther, etc. D. They return to the strong pre-patch BMD2 decisions, now clearly evident. They are numerous, strong and inexpensive. Yes, I received smoke grenades, which are effective for their cost, 35 points, making them half the price of a BMP2. While the frontal armor is significantly weaker, the autocannon remains the same, and there are 3 similar competitors, making this a formidable damage per second DPS option. Currently, the Vimpel group is the sole elite force, while American airborne units lack cohesion and will likely fail against them, resembling a squad of Terminators. There are no opinions on artillery. The prices for both the standard BMD-3 and reconnaissance BMD-3 are reasonable, though the latter is notably inexpensive. This pricing issue is identified as a bug. This will be addressed in the next fashion wave, which is very pleasant. Flights are significantly cheaper as shown. The MiG-31 has been modified to be capable of one-shot capabilities. The 10XE allows your MiG-31 to one-shot easily. And enemy planes, considering how the strong 15th is in the epaulette, you have a direct counter to them. Again, it's not a fact that all divisions will be added to the mod, because some divisions, in my opinion, simply aren't needed in the game. The text suggests that everything will eventually be simplified into a few divisions, which will be more varied and engaging, providing internal choices for players. But for now, it's all naturally in what you might call a tech demo. And to put it another way, the game is essentially a mod, and it works. You have all you need to play. I encourage everyone to join my English-speaking server whenever you like. We have a steady stream of players. We just need to coordinate and bring them together. Well, regarding aviation, yes, you see, everything has become cheaper. I'm providing a somewhat chaotic overview, and I'm contemplating what additional details to include, so I think we'll transition to the review and replay now. Welcome to the replay of Homelander versus NBK. In this match, Homelander is in the blue corner using an American Tier 3 tank, while NBK, in red shorts, operates his favorite Tier 7 armor, a class once beloved in the original Varna, but later dismantled by developers. I'm showing you right away. Here it is now. Recon deploy looks like this. The regular army and recon deploy are in place, and everything seems to have returned to Dorma, except for the teleport issue affecting the paratroopers. The forward deploy would be nearby, but I believe it ultimately supports balance above all else. The new map, by the way, someone must have definitely noticed it among those who play Arno more or less regularly. The maps come bundled with a mod, so you don't need to install any additional ones. The maps are made according to the wargaming principle. Don't close the video yet. There will be various cards, and the experiment is still active. For now, the maps are like this, so you have more contested areas to actually fight in. You are provided with one front and two sides to engage in combat on this map, covering half of the area. A whole half of the map where you can fight. In the city of Prolevskia and its surrounding villages, players engage in a broader front of combat which enhances gameplay. This one-on-one scenario operates under standard mod settings, starting with 2,000 points per player, leading to differences in unit availability, which can be intimidating but ultimately adds to the fun. The forward deployment of troops, particularly airborne units, is strategically illustrated alongside the targeting crafter and regular reconnaissance, highlighting how the movement of the army is organized. Overall, this setup appears more balanced and correct, enriching the overall gaming experience. We'll review the replay tool as usual. It won't show income without keys from my account, but that's not a big issue. Homelander chose not to take the FOP, which is likely typical behavior for him, as he tends to enjoy playing fast and loose with the rules. Homelander prefers an aggressive strategy, focusing 90% of his army in one direction with minimal defense. In contrast, I adopt a more balanced and defensive approach. Now we will watch the fight right here. So this is the Faggot M. The factory is now a separate tour that has 19 penetration. The developers assert this is a factory, and I'm open to any counter-arguments. Our findings led us to this conclusion. The changes with the birds have definitely not happened. I don't know why I wanted to say something just now. Repeated emphasis on but suggests hesitation. I called the helicopter and flanked around, but I was surprised that the Homelander team didn't defend anything, especially over Dmitri. And how did he not push me through here then? Let's see. A standard offensive is underway, but Bredlia is burning and the KPVT is inflicting damage on the infantry. Impossible, right? The damage has been repaired everywhere. The engineers received their trade for the sprint. Watch how quickly they run in. This is actually a really cool ability, and they are currently taking almost no damage from stress, meaning you can shoot at them and it won't matter to them. And here it is, the very dragon. You see, the infantry is fleeing, damage is being dealt to the infantry, tanks are firing at the scouts, and it's working. It's simply wonderful. A tank is firing at a bird indoors. Elite Tank 21, penetration 22 from 1.5x HE. The bird inside the house is dying. Infantry in the fields are being defeated by tanks. The main achievement of this mod is the damage. Infantry now dies in the fields. There's no longer the enjoyment of charging across fields with infantry, which is unfortunate. Homelander arrived here due to my lack of tanks. Infantry battle commences. The modified SVD is inflicting concussions on enemy units, particularly with 2 snipers in action. The SVD is designed to damage morale, quickly driving enemies into a state of panic. Homelander isn't foolish, he maximizes everything. The mod's maximum air defense level gives a sense of confidence. Homelander neglects the flank here. Homelander chose 2 top-tier tanks, but is currently hesitant to use them. As you can see, the engineers were on the run, and they immediately took significantly more damage. The damage was reworked, but the house covers remain unchanged, making them identical to those in the regular game. The BMP-1 will have an increased shell on the gun. The tank is a strong unit costing 170 points, making it easy to acquire. It provides a badge to nearby troops and operates with an additional badge, which is convenient. As you can see, there are machine guns, so you can't just run out onto the street for free like they did in Varna. I find this entirely accurate. The powerful Bradley machine forces the BMP-1 to retreat and smoke, unable to cope effectively. The city battle continues as both enemy and American forces are incapacitated, leaving insufficient GDR troops to confront them. Nevertheless, if tanks intervene in this fight now, everything will happen much faster. The situation with the tanks is unclear, but it's evident that they converge rapidly, within less than a second. This faster reaction time, along with increased smoke dispersion speed, indicates that the pace of tank gameplay has significantly accelerated. The BMP-1 is aiding us in battles, but ours has gone missing and might end up flying off to an unknown location. The infantry advance requires our Homelander to adapt, understanding that infantry doesn't operate independently. However, his top tanks are successfully dismantling my medium tanks, aligning with expected principles. The BMP-1 on the flank couldn't engage in time as the HA converges and settles rapidly. This is elite HC, it's just a monster. After 13 seconds of sitting, the tanks displayed their intended colors. Reconnaissance is delaying 2 infantry platoons' advance. The BMP-11 will be destroyed here. I'm a tank enthusiast who enjoys talking about tanks frequently. The Apache is falling here. It was primarily luck that aided my evening prayers, as a commander was present, resulting in 55% accuracy of the shots. Fortunately, they struck the Apache simultaneously. Homelander remains calm as he dismantles my tanks, unable to provide the necessary support for the infantry that is dying around him, despite the urgent situation. The swift ones need to be moved to the back line to avoid being wiped out, or the scout will also be taken down. T-72M1, BAM, you see, it quickly aims and deals damage. I don't smoke tanks here and punishment is coming. The helicopter operates on the right flank, and unlike the original Varna, the battle spans the entire map. As the enemy breaches my defenses here, I can still advance elsewhere since it's unfeasible to keep infantry stationed in houses indefinitely. I can easily shoot the infantry and continue. The modification allows for an easier breakthrough compared to the original Varna. The Armored Fist of America just destroyed this intersection. I've gotten the position and sent out my scout, but Homelander is being a nuisance, hindering our progress. The BMP-1 is unaware it's being shot at, unable to return fire, and likely facing destruction soon. Look at that luck. The 70% accuracy rate suggests that shots should rarely miss. Luck plays a major role. The only thing is that Bradleys will become cheaper because conditionally M21 Bradleys are not better than BMP-2 in the realities of the mod, so I will make them cheaper. The Bradley has about 80 favorable points, and the 2A features a notable breakthrough with an enhanced ATGM, all reflecting the true characteristics of these vehicles. The KPVT was taken to the base but was quickly destroyed by the Bradley. The rear war with Dmitri is underway. Basically, at some point, I'll just get the commander to a 2. Flender also loses its center. American tanks, especially the T-77s, are advancing and effectively targeting infantry. A squad's accidental rush led to their immediate punishment by the tank, highlighting its top-tier status. Your unit costs 40 points, whereas the tank costs 310 points. A 310-point tank should penalize basic mistakes, like stepping out of houses. Such a thing is unimaginable in the original version. The Humvee's response to a flanking maneuver is being observed, as 2 BMPs and some infantry are involved. Meanwhile, the Igla is successfully targeting helicopters, despite the patch falling. I was just lucky in this fight. My snipers performed well, and we didn't change them at all. The air defense has improved overall due to the reduced cost of issuing insignias. You now have a distinct category of units that only provide badges. The officers. There are a lot of them in the infantry, and they are cheap. Badges can be awarded to various military units, including infantry, air defense, and tanks. We haven't greatly improved the software's features yet to avoid potential issues. If Homelander had organized the fight, coordinated reconnaissance, and brought in infantry instead of fleeing, he could have easily defeated them. If the technique comes too close, it will face swift consequences. The Bredlia ignites quickly, causing the BMP to retreat. The DPS remains adequate. I'm reviewing the replays and noticing that this mod is likely much harder than the original game, but we need to encourage people to try it. Currently, I'm speaking while numerous changes are racing through my mind, making it feel like nothing has changed, but the mod size is 15 megabytes. The 15 megabyte mod transforms the game, making it feel entirely new. You're taking damage but have a breakthrough at the front. I can't recall a breakthrough like this ever happening in WARNO. There are some remnants here. The war continues on the other flank, and there are still diversions taking place, meaning gameplay is happening across different parts of the map. Homelander faced immediate punishment after entering the woods with tanks, losing his line infantry, and now must retreat quickly. The chaparral here is tough on my MI2. My helicopter landed nearby due to a naturally spotted chaparral, so I had to hide. The GDR has a notable advantage over America in terms of stronger infantry, largely due to superior insignia and armament. The chaparral can easily defeat the M24P, whereas typically half the ammunition would be used in combat scenarios. The ICHE with 1 HP needs to be pulled back for repairs. Here, there's support from the line infantry. You can see how easily the infantry's attack on the buildings is repelled with the support of a tank that operates like a tank, not some armored personnel carrier with a machine gun, at best a 50 caliber. Reinforcements from the GDR are arriving, and strong engagement is occurring on the flank. The commander successfully counterattacked, but there's a risk he could be killed. This game, particularly this mod, requires strategic force combination instead of mindless clicking to achieve victory. Junk can be hazardous to infantry if it targets them directly or lacks reconnaissance support. The American stronghold here was easily overrun, and I believe the scouts will soon be driven out as well. Homelander counterattacks as stormtroopers enter the woods. The Schutzens will perish here since they lack badges, unlike the engineers who have badges and a damage boost rate. I anticipate surprising Dmitri soon, motivated by my desire to win, as the BMPs have arrived. Protecting positions and eliminating valuable commanders is currently important, and this strategy is still effective for now. The contentious commanders face a skirmish on the front as you seek a weak point to breach the rear, eliminate the commander, and seize victory. The scene depicts a well-organized and diverse battle, featuring infantry and tank combat, reconnaissance missions, field-holding units, and supportive helicopters working together effectively. At 10 meters the arrow is exposed, enabling the enemy's Bradley to detect and destroy it with no backup provided. I've gained an advantage with the nth number of points, as they accumulate more slowly on most maps. It's all because there were no problems when you can't win, simply because the opponent has 1,500 points in the first 10 minutes of the game. If someone wins the original war deployment, it's nearly impossible to defeat them again. That's pure nonsense. Even if you inflict equal or double damage, he may still win due to having accumulated much more early on. I have 10 minutes until victory, and am controlling almost the entire map. My commander was eliminated, and the Apache's autocannons were buffed. They are closely dismantling it now. The Homelander attacks but lacks tank support, resulting in a rapid burnout of the platoon despite quicker aiming and more frequent shots. We're watching at X2, but remember when we played at X4, and infantry still took a long time to die. I apologize for not having the energy or time to provide a detailed review of the fashion. I believe I can still find time for this, but I urge everyone to try this modification, as just 15 MB of data can fix the game. This reflects the motto of the fashion. My commander, Homelander, was humorously taken out by artillery fire. Well, we lost 145 points, I lost 155 points, and it will take time to recover. Homelander enters the forest, highlighting that AT4 operates more aggressively and converges quickly, with line of sight changing significantly. The tank can see the edge of the forest from its current position, but to see deeper inside it must move closer. Your view in the forest is impressive, but your H only sees what's ahead. Excellent, isn't it? What is the issue in WARNO? The tank can see like this. The tank frequently fires through the vegetation. The infantry is left idle. Sometimes your front may not form because you can simply drive past as if the forest isn't there. A tough guy with a grenade launcher takes out a T-55 tank without infantry support, which is manned by someone with an NPK patch, and it quickly bursts into flames. That's great, that's how it should be. The forest battle in this mod has been notably enhanced and is now much better. CHED functions similarly against enemy tanks as it does here. And so there remains an interesting balance, where you have a stormtrooper who lacks an OPT tool. In that case, he can be easily taken apart on tracks, and he will die easily. I aim to deploy the infantryman effectively. He could have used the AT4 to destroy my T-72 while Homelander was engaged elsewhere, but he mismanaged it. Despite this, Homelander is still winning on this flank. Remember, multiple fights are occurring across the map. Players make the game appear effortless, just as you think. We were just messing around with beer and typing randomly. The transformation of WARNO is truly invaluable in its beauty and improvement. Fights occur here. Different units were summoned immediately. When the units are operational, various units are available. Not just spam tanks and artillery, but various Shusins, SVD, because now there is a difference, you see. Different tanks are used, because now at least all tanks can deal DPS and so on. Various people are riding around and so on. Fashion is likely to evolve further in the future. More choices will be available in one division. The game's expanded scale does not appeal to me. It's challenging to replicate the original WARNO one-on-one, but in fashion, it's attainable and intriguing. The fast-paced gameplay ensures no downtime, making it feel quick even against dull opponents, requiring swift decision-making. An attack is occurring with mortars, and I'm recalling much of this during the introduction, despite the smoke. They returned the normal collection and fixed the damage. The normal damage, so to speak, was primarily done because the WARNO smokes were weak, and they were slightly buffed. Including because the meaning of "hey" corresponds to, strangely enough, the size of this smoke cloud. Smoke lingers longer now, and most importantly, the mortar now also hits the target with corrections. You can now use mortars to target infantry as before. The 120mm mortar is designed to function this way. The 120mm mortar is employed to eliminate anti-tank missile teams. He entered the forest and faced immediate consequences. How cool. Broken Arrow lacks this. There's a ground battle currently occurring in a combined operation, which is more effective than in Broken Arrow. I hope we achieve the same level of ground combat execution in Broken Arrow. Everything from stormtroopers to tanks functions similarly, and mistakes will lead to quick punishment. That's all. Reconnaissance is underway. While I haven't requested it much in this battle, having a scout with 20 points enables quick replenishment. In this scene, a tank unexpectedly attacks a dragon that isn't engaging at close range. The tank easily defeats a fireteam dragon caught off guard, illustrating its overwhelming power. The tank inflicts damage on infantry. It is designed to run over clueless soldiers like these who found themselves nowhere. Childhood trauma acknowledged. The tanks in the forest are about to become a meme. The air defense wasn't significantly improved, so occasional issues still occur, but they aren't serious. I could place a 10-point arrow here from the second rank, and everything would be fine. I can summon a fighter for 135 points. The GDR fighter is priced at 135 points, while aviation is generally cheaper. The home number in Phantom 2 signifies an elite ace capable of destroying enemy helicopters in a single strike. Helicopters in the game have no issues. Cubes now cost 90 points and offer very good air detection. It seems unlikely we'll see anything better for now, though excellent detection may exist in the code. They now have 90 points and can acquire 3 badges on the card, requiring 6 dice for the first badge, which allows effective commander use. In fashion, radical changes are rare. The primary changes involve damage adjustments, a complete build overhaul, and significant income modifications. Cards are key elements. Maps enhance gameplay by spreading war across the entire area instead of focusing on just one location, unlike in the original war. Here you can slowly scroll through. Homelander will now try to shift the attack to the other flank, because we have a stalemate here, and he specifically needs to gain an advantage in points. I'm intrigued by the powerful tank force's presence here, but I recall my aviation is about to take off, which shifts my focus. We played on the triplet this morning, so I might forget something. Bradley steps onto the T-55. Overall, yes. Fighting against this is definitely challenging. All my tanks have been destroyed. And that's absolutely right, because bam. Just like that, everything changes in an instant, leaving you surprised and amazed by the sudden turn of events. This cluster likely didn't just injure, it fully incinerated enemies in the original WARNO, one-shotting tanks. It costs 215 points now, and no cluster player can one-shot you with a full M1HA for that amount. It may not make sense. The clusters were modified to ensure they would not destroy tanks in one hit, but instead weaken or finish them off. It's uncommon to have it differently. Exchange F-15 thanks to the software and so on. A new cluster has formed and the cells can be filled. The aviation experience feels altered, possibly due to changes in travel time or repair speed, but I can't confirm anything at this moment. Overall, these aspects seem too complex and not particularly engaging to me. The weakness of 3 remains, and he only possesses the Chaparrali from the software, despite having had the chance to obtain the 15s with the Hemlander. The 15th now features polished frames. Now the tanks and BMPs are buffed, meaning they deal damage, but if you take BMPs into the forest without infantry support, that is, if you don't organize a fight, you'll be in trouble. Simply driving up with 2 BM-21s to block the sun's route is unlikely to be effective. Although I was a bit lucky here, the fact remains. The tank would have survived since RPGs don't damage it from the front. They set off in those weak BMPs and were quickly met with immediate punishment. That is to say, this is precisely what distinguishes WARNO, even in this mod, from Steel Division 2, where all the tanks play the role of the Bradley. All tanks function as infantry fighting vehicles, approaching forests where engaging infantry is difficult. Moreover, if you just happen to drive up there at all, he simply one-shots you. He just one-shots you. Everything is done correctly in this mod's realities. BMPs are vulnerable to RPGs if not monitored, but tanks can penetrate front lines in forested areas with good organization, as armored divisions require resources to overcome obstacles. So this is the situation that should happen. This is the ideal one. A tank starts to seriously damage the spotted infantryman. The tank can easily approach the infantryman and defeat him using its frontal armor, which is more valuable than the infantryman's lesser cost. In Brokinero, the process is similar but not identical. That's all. This mode is improved. The flyover destroyed my MLRS. Flying in this mod is now the fundamental basis. Homelander's laziness prevented me from burning the fob again. Phubus added 2 stripes and it functions well. He earned his 2nd stripe on his own, without a commander present. The Homelander helicopter commander was defeated and failed to land. I think there's a little joke here after all. All right, there's no joke for now. But something the mod developer told me I didn't quite understand. He is so brilliant that I don't fully understand him. The light infantry units, those 4 companies, instead of being more resilient, were planned to have added agility due to their lack of durability. In other words, if you have 4 little guys in your squad and there's a light scout sitting in this huge complex of houses, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 houses, then strangely enough, the damage they take should be less. I don't know if he added it in the version of the build we played. Basically, this is not very important, because the main thing is that the core of the game works, which is the damage and the interest in the game. Interest and fun exist in the game. Let's skip this part. It's already obvious. A comprehensive full counterattack will occur right here now. The commander has most likely been successfully spotted. I plan to take him out using this SAM system, likely with a bomber. You can still enter calmly, as everything is handled well. Such an interesting fight. Thank you, Homelander, for joining me. Unfortunately, I can't comment on or explain the fashion today, primarily because I haven't played in a while, as you know. I'm gradually getting back in shape. But the main goal of this video was to show you this wonderful mod and encourage all of you to play it, comment on it, rate it, and share it with your friends. Because seriously, this is what saving Varna looks like. This is literally what a game that is no worse than Broken Arrow looks like. In other words, in some places it was even more interesting, and the ground gameplay was significantly cooler. You can roughly assess the effectiveness of the units that are still operational by looking at the kilograms. BMP-1s work very well. The BMP-1 vehicle was heavily buffed. Now there is a factory with better penetration. It simply aims faster and shoots faster, meaning it hits and deals some damage. The damage to infantry from tanks has increased significantly. Infantry battles are more interesting because of the assault troops, who, in my opinion, bring a specific balance to the game. The air defense is generally amusing, but this is not evident in the case of the GDR, as there is no access to additional insignia, although there is access to the commanders, conditionally. T-72M leader who issues insignias around him. Overall, tanks now perform better due to the aiming time. Here's some powerful BMP-1. As you can see, even here I don't know. It has taken out a whole bunch of everything. A BMP-1 even took out 2 Bradleys. Just a reminder, the MLRS hasn't been modified for artillery yet. It hasn't been redone at all, or at least I think it hasn't been redone at all. That means the price has decreased a little, but I don't know how it will perform. What was done to lower the price is explained by the fact that almost everyone has cheap drones, and if you want the enemy's artillery to fall silent, you simply fly around it. Plus, I forgot to mention that overall, there is generally less supply on the supply trucks. In other words, the supply has generally become more expensive if it is not called from Phobos. Therefore, the preservation of supplies and Phobos is a very important aspect of the game, specifically in this modification. Here is the SVD hero that 3 Bradleys tried to ambush in the woods. The Laster took out 2 top tanks in the end and finished off according to the information. Tanks, Tessidvoys, can basically fight even against an M1 1-on-1. Bombers haven't changed much except that they have become cheaper, and possibly because of that, they reload a bit faster, but I can't say for sure. Well, we worked quite well with those LED 10 sneaky ones in general. Basically, what can I say? Unsubscribe to the mod workshop via the link, check the box here, click apply, invite your friends, and just like usual, create a lobby and invite people there. Just a reminder that the standard rule for this mode is 2,000 per person, which is very important. It's not that it's extremely important, but it is important in principle. I would also like to point out that there are different maps here. The maps are significantly more interesting to play than the originals. Not all of them, of course, but for example, 1-on-1, the rail map plays wonderfully. We haven't tried Triple Strike 1-on-1 yet. In my opinion, this experimental version we made doesn't appeal to me very much. Here is version 2. It's more interesting and implies a battle happening somewhere here and here, for example. At disputed points, well, basically you can impose a fight on the opponent wherever you want, I promise. Well, it seems there aren't many more maps added. There is still Crown 4-on-4, but again, that's all testing stuff. Overall, there was little time for maps, but the railway ones are probably the most polished and refined maps. Iron Skyway hasn't been tested yet either, but we might stream this modification specifically while gathering a team, not any other. Pouring. I remember the orders for the division. We will be playing in this mode, and I hope you will really enjoy it. And that's all. Thank you, everyone. That's about it.